All right, here we go.
What's good, everybody? I'm Robert Dickens Jr.
This is Ryan Reed.
This is Elanders Frazier.
This is John Gaal, and you're listening to Volta.
Changing the conversation
For percussion educators,
designers,
and performers.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Volta Percussion.
I was like, that was fast. I was like, did it even start recording yet? That's a good point. Rob, can you explain that one more time? That's a very good point. And I want to hear you say it again because I thought about this after we had that discussion with everybody on that Sunday night about what more could be done in our community. The community we subscribe to.
Sure. I think, the big question that's there that I saw in a recent interview was what can we as a drum corps community contribute to the music education community at large outside of the competitive aspects of what it is that we do. So outside of, people coming to our events, coming to, drum corps regionals, drum corps shows, coming to our training camps and things that we offer for students for leadership and this, that, and whatever. What can we do outside of that to be a benefit to the bands and the music education, even on a university level in our area? Because I feel like that's a really relevant question just because of the fact that I feel like there's always been a barrier between drum corps and band in general, just because, drum corps has always been this subculture of marching band people. But I feel like the biggest part of that is that there's such a delineation that there's no overlap to where drum corps is more approachable because it's interwoven into the fabric of band in general. And I feel like that's probably one of the things that maybe is somewhat off-putting to some directors when it comes down to allowing their students to participate in the activity, having a positive expectation of the activity and shining positive light on the activity. I feel like that's one of the biggest things because it seems very self-serving of the activity to be like, okay, well, just come to our stuff and we'll show you the way that we do things and, come, buy tickets so that you can see what we're doing and this, that, and whatever. It's like, well, where does drum corps actually serve, again, the music education community at large and benefits people when it's not about just recruiting? And I'll say his last point before I kind of throw it back to you, because one of the things that I caution some of my students about that have gone to certain university band camps or drum camps is that at certain universities, who will remain nameless, sometimes students go there and they don't learn anything except that university's fight song and all the other cultural things that have to do with that group, but they don't actually get skills that they can take back and use at their school. So I feel like in a lot of ways, drum corps can kind of get that kind of a rap with our camps and stuff that we promote. Come and pay this money so that we can, in a sense, recruit you to drum corps, recruit you to this particular drum corps culture, and not necessarily caring about the whole aspect of a student and what they can take back with them to their program.
Yeah, so this is exactly what I was thinking about kind of the other day, and it was triggered by, conversations about how there's a divide between the show style community and the core style community and what drum corps do and the role that they play inside of that circle of pageantry. Let's call it that, right? So we've got a couple of different sections. A lot of it was brought up in the On the 50 podcast that Tony Lyman did with Dan Shack. But the question is exactly to your point, how did drum corps transition from being about getting community kids to take them out of maybe bad places and teach them something worthwhile that included life skills, etc., to a purely competitive genre of things to do, right? So if we just trace it back to, any drum corps that existed in like the 40s, 50s, and 60s, I'm sure they weren't solely there to compete. And I'll say this from onset, I don't think that drum corps that are starting now, especially ones that maybe start from grassroots in their own community, start with the intent of solely being about competition, because you really can't. Like, when you don't know what kind of students you're going to get, you really, like, competition is really the last thing that's on your mind, right? Like, you're just trying to function, right? Whether that's the long-term goal or not, like, you're literally just trying to function. So the question is now that we've got this systematic model that's built about what it means to be an upper echelon junior drum corps, or we can call senior corps, they're about the same. How much thought goes into the education aspect of it in relationship to how we're affecting the communities that we're in? And are we upset with the turnout of students that come from that area when we don't actually put energy back into it? Right? We got a lot of flyers that fly everywhere to go do drum corps. And I get it, like, if it's your favorite corps and you have the capacity to make it. But if it's not, and you're still not going to try out for the corps that's within an hour, hour and a half, 2-hour drive from your home, why?
I think a lot of that has to do with the allure of the top 12. And just the allure of world class. Because there are, a lot of people that, won't do the open class thing because they think it's beneath them, without ever really doing their due diligence to look at who's teaching an open class, and I think if you look at a lot of the open class staffs, they've got just as much, if not more, teaching experience and more world-class experience than some of the world-class groups do, and from a purely teaching standpoint, because I've taught in both. I've taught in DCA and I've taught in DCI world class and DCI open class. It's more of an expectation, whereas the pure teaching, at least in my experiences, has happened more on the open class side of things. But I think it's that allure of the prestige of being in a top 12 group, or the prestige of being in a open, or in a just a world-class group, and getting to maybe go on Saturday night, or definitely getting to go on Friday, that kind of stuff, that I think motivates kids, rightfully or wrongfully, to be the drum corps flyers. And I think that has also trickled into the community side of things, where, definitely on the drum corps side of things, where drum corps are investing less in communities, at least from a public standpoint, because they're not drawing from their own community. I don't know if there's a way to change that because, like drum corps are out there doing clinics and are trying to give back to the music education community and the teaching community and that kind of stuff. But it's not a constant thing, or it's not a consistent thing. It's like come to our annual drum camp or our annual drum major thing or our annual, whatever thing.
Does it
I
almost
don't know if
seem
there's an
like it's
answer.
an inconvenience? And I hate to put it like that, but I try to be as
Yes,
transparent and
it is an
clear.
inconvenience. Because let's think about it again from a financial situation and from a time standpoint, right? So what drum corps is actively sending out their instructors within their community, paying them to teach different schools in their community? Who has the time? I mean, those instructors have other jobs that they have to do. And drum corps aren't making money. They're not a sport NFL type team that they can dish out tons and tons of money for these instructors to go out, give up their time and their services to not get anything in return. And these communities, these schools in the districts or the vicinity of each of these drum corps are not willing to shell out thousands of dollars for one instructor to come in or a couple instructors to come in for a couple hours. Right? So there's a disagreement on value right there, just because drum corps activity as a whole is not a money-making business. Now, to go back to what you originally talked about with the drum corps, why it's more competitive in nature now than back then, 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, whenever all that stuff. Well, back then, it was more of a homage to keeping the war veterans going, to being patriotic, to keeping the kids off the street. There weren't a lot of options back in that time to do other things besides just be in a gang or work or just hang out with friends, right? So like drum corps, these Boy Scout troops, Girl Scout troops, whatever, were formed because soldiers were coming back from the war and they wanted to keep their patriotic marching style going. The kids wanted to be a part of it, and so it was more of a patriotic type of thing. As the years progressed, and it became more of a competitive aspect because I believe, especially now in the 21st century, I mean, there's a lot more options. Right, the kids are no longer trying to get off the street and joining gangs, joining drum corps, because it's not that type of community anymore. I mean, kids can go to college, they can work, they can go do an internship somewhere, they can travel the country. Right, drum corps is not like the only thing for them to do extracurricular anymore. And so the type of kid who's interested in this activity, I would say maybe yes, they want an educational aspect. Which I would say most do, but at the same time, I would say there's a higher level of competition because that's how the arts have evolved. Because who wants to do something just for fun anymore these days? It's all about the competition side of things. That's what I think.
Before you respond, Rob, I got to ask a question to you. When do you think the breaking point was? Where
Let me. Are you talking to me?
Well, I'm talking to everybody because I wanted to put this out in the ethos here. Me? When do you think the breaking point was where it transitioned from being less about the community and more about the competitive journey?
I'm glad you asked.
That's the best way I can say it.
I'll let other people answer first because I wrote a paper on this back in grad school. So someone else talk first, and then let me pull up my notes.
Well, that's great. I don't particularly, I can't say that I can pinpoint a time. Uh, mm, I feel like the PBS broadcast and some other things that brought the world into the drum corps community is a big part of that transition. Because I know when I marched in 2007, I want to say from 2005 all the way to 2007, possibly, part of DCI finals was shown on ESPN.
Yeah.
I know for sure 2007 finals was shown on ESPN. So I guess opening the opportunity for everyone to see what this particular culture is a big part of that. And I feel like now, in the absence of that, in the absence of the PBS broadcast, in the absence of the outside world, like doing something to actually shine light on what we're doing, I feel like we personally kind of gone into ourselves. And we've just 100% been in our own world, which is cool, but I don't think that music is purely for the competitive aspect. Like there has to be, because at the end of the day, music and art and all these things are for communication. They're communication tools. They're mediums, as Mystique would say. So there has to be some type of connection between us and the audience. But I feel like more and more the activity has become just, in a way, incestuous. Like drum corps doesn't have any new fans. You know what I mean? I think that probably if you look back in the 80s, you probably would have a lot of people that watched drum corps that had never marched. And if you look at it nowadays, drum corps is just all people that have done the activity and that's it. It has no appeal to anyone who's outside of the activity to say, oh, okay, this is very highly artistic. This is interesting. This is musical. This is intelligent, well thought out, and it's designed. But I still get it, and I'm still interested in what's happening, what I see that's happening, even though I know I can't do that. You know what I mean? People will go to see Cirque du Soleil, and, they're not a, trapeze artist or,
they're bankrupt. They don't exist anymore.
That's unfortunate.
Sorry.
Anyway, but my point is there are people that went to go see that particular act that had never participated in it ever.
Right.
So
yeah, because it's awesome.
Yeah, but that's my point. They were able to do something that's highly artistic, but they're also able to communicate something that was interesting and entertaining to the general public. I feel like drum corps has failed on the back end of that. Doing something that's actually connecting with the general public. All the stories that we're telling are just our own stories ourselves and nothing that connects with the real world in any way that anybody would actually watch it outside of the community.
I think that's where WGI has excelled in terms of storytelling from a communication standpoint of things that concepts that are more generalized to an audience that can understand it on first read. It's not so ethereal to where like it just goes over for most shows. I can't say that for every single show. There are some folks where I watch the show, I love the music, I have no idea what I just watched. But there are a lot of shows that like I get like teared up and emotional because I understand what's being done, right? And as you were talking about like the broadcast for like ESPN and PBS, I wonder, why did we stop broadcasting on PBS? Like, why was the community, because PBS is what, public broadcasting system?
Yeah.
Why was the public broadcasting system, which typically is showing stuff that is free and you can go, check out this culture thing that you may be able to add value to your life, right? Why did we move from that source model to a pay model where now you have to pay a subscription service to be able to access this?
Because we were too worried about money. And that became I feel like it became our motivation in general. Like, I feel like as an artist, it's hard to be true to yourself and actually express something worthwhile when you're wondering whether or not it's going to make money. Because now all of your decisions have to be curbed based on commerce and what people actually will pay for. And I feel like that's kind of what happened in drum corps, was like we couldn't necessarily tell the stories that we wanted to tell because there's so many drum corps that are mismanaged financially, and there are so many things that it wasn't going to pay. But I think, again, authenticity still sells. If you don't understand the song, you don't understand the show, when you connect with a person emotionally, people are drawn to that. And there's a way to monetize that. But I feel like we got very commercial over a period of time because we were worried about money and worried about stuff selling.
Real quick, if you want a nice little timeline, I want to retract my statement. I did not write this paper. I actually read this dissertation. It's a dissertation by Dr. Matt Jordan. I think you guys know him. He wrote this. This was his dissertation for Florida State. So I read it, and I wrote down all these notes. But a quick timeline about how drum corps started. So way back in the day, this American Civil War, drums were used for signaling units. At the end of World War I, radio communication took over the place of drum corps. So now the end of World War I, you have the veterans of foreign wars and the American Legion. They started sponsoring these local drum corps because they wanted soldiers to stay and maintain their musical connection. So then in 1921, you had the American Legion. That was the first drum and bugle corps championship was held. So that was by the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the VFW. And that was a senior corps. So only people who marched and did all that were allowed in. But then in 1932, you had the Sons of the American Legion formed. So that's when the younger kids started joining in, help the kids stay off the street. And then since then, move it up a lot. In 1972, you had DCI that they were formed because they kind of wanted to do their own things apart from all the military traditions. So you had the military traditions in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s. People started wanting to do their own thing, explore the creative side like you were talking about, Rob. And then in 1972, DCI was formed. Bugles, drums, and cymbals were the only thing allowed. 1974, the mallet percussion started happening with the Cavaliers and the 27th Lancers. 1978, they actually started putting mallet percussion on the field. You didn't have to march around to play them. That's where Jim Campbell came in. He was one of the first modern front ensembles formed. And then 1982, front ensembles on the field with the Blue Devils and so forth and so forth. But anyway, I thought that beginning chunk of how drum corps first started, like I said before, it was first mainly patriotic, and then it formed to helping keep the kids off the street. And eventually the patriotic side, I guess, I don't want to say crumbled, but got outmaneuvered by more of the creative side, being less regimented of how they marched, how they looked when DCI came in. And then from then, I would say the creative side has exploded, and now it's turned, probably I'd say since the early 2000s, it's turned into more of a financial side. So I would say that's how we've progressed from patriotic to creativity to now. There's still tons of creativity in the whole drum corps atmosphere, but now it's more with a financial competitive aspect.
So we basically let American society take over an art. Because, as we know, the majority of American society is based and rooted in capitalism, right? Which is driven by money. So how do we get it? How do we make the conversation or how do we make the case to get it back?
You can't. It's too late. Move on to a new creative.
Well, how do we get it back to that happy medium? Because like I said, I feel like when you say something like that it moved from the creativity to the ultra competitive money generating, like you said, I feel like that sweet spot was probably like 1990 to like maybe 2004, 2005, maybe halfway through the new millennium, right? Like,
It's right when amplification was processed, 2004.
right,
It's all
and
amplification's fault.
and I can't blame amplification, because I feel like, and people may crucify me on this, but I feel like had they had let woodwinds into the scenario, the monetary thing would have evened itself out, and it wouldn't be such a burden, because now you have access to every student that plays an instrument, as opposed to now they have to go learn a different instrument to participate. Like if it had become competitive marching bands, if that makes sense, right? I'm not saying that I'm like an ultra proponent for it, because I do agree there are a lot of good things about drum and bugle corps that are totally separate from competitive marching bands. But I feel like that would have leveled some of that playing field for all those students that feel like they don't have the opportunity, but they also don't have the want and wish to go learn a different instrument just to be a part of it, right? Which is why you have a lot of students that end up learning how to play cymbals or learning how to play baritones, etc. Because maybe, and I'm not calling out baritones specifically, but maybe they know they don't have the chops to become like a soloist, but they also want to be a part of a group and excel to where they can get into, like we talked about, that upper echelon, the top 12, right?
So I think you run into a few other issues though that don't solve that. You know, like you brought up the woodwind thing. Then you bring in the financial aspect of having to get those instruments, okay? And a lot of the corps, again, are endorsed, so they're going to get them at a steep discount, or for some of the top 12 ones, maybe get them for free. But you got to get reeds for all those instruments. You got to get pads for all those instruments. You got to get tools for all those instruments. You got to get techs for all those instruments. You know, I think, so you brought up a real interesting point about WGI from a creative standpoint, storytelling standpoint versus DCI. And I think that there's a big difference. So think about anything that's cinematic, like a movie, a play, anything like that. They can put you in an entire atmosphere because they can set the mood, they can set the music, they can set the scenery. WGI, when you're in the University of Dayton, is completely blacked out. So the center of your attention is drawn to that tarp, that ensemble, that story. If you're talking about getting DCI back to a purely artistic standpoint, you know, you almost have to make the argument that we have to black out the football field, which is not
Okay,
possible.
Don't they already black out all the seats in the back?
They do.
But I'm talking about the field itself.
Well, and
So no line markers?
No yard markers, but like corps got to start using a tarp so they convey their story. Like you have to set an entire scene, because that's what WGI can do. Like as soon as you're not...
That's a very heavy tarp.
Correct. As soon as you're not invested in those characters to the point where you're taken out of reality, which any good movie can take you out of reality because you feel like you're living in that movie. And there have definitely been drum corps shows, marching band shows that have done that. But the hardest part of doing that is you don't have the scenery. You can't control the entire atmosphere. You know, you can't control, unless you use a tarp, in Lucas Oil, that there's a giant football helmet on the 50. You know, one of the most clever things to put you in, like a scene and a mood, was, we talked about it, I think, on the last episode, the Cadets Power of 10 show, where they changed every yard number to the number 10. And that year was an anniversary year for the NFL, so the 50 was gold. So they got the sample of the gold and matched the gold to it. So the 10 in the center of the field was the same gold as the 50. So that when you looked, it was 10, 10, 10, 10, 10 across the whole field. You didn't see a 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. You just saw 10s. And I think that's the closest that we've been. And we can say that, yeah, props do it, but it's still a green grass field when you look at it, or green AstroTurf field when you look at it. So, you know, Cirque du Soleil is the same way. Like, they put you in an atmosphere because they're in a theater. Think about seeing Cirque du Soleil in
But they can also
football.
adjust the lighting.
Yeah. Think
That's
about
true.
seeing them on a football field or in a high school gymnasium.
Yeah, I will say, like, that's one of the things that I've always appreciated about WGI is it gave you more of that black box theater versus, like, marching band was a community outdoor performance. You know what I mean? Where, like, you saw them walking onto the stage and they were just reading lines. Like, that was like the comparison I always drew, because WGI was so much more intimate in that regard. But I also recall a time in drum corps where I felt like I could go watch a show, and this, obviously this is purely biased because I was already bought into the music side of it, but I felt like I could go watch a show and there was so little distraction with set that I was able to focus on exactly what they wanted me to focus on, if that makes sense. So, like,
Which group are you talking about?
I'm talking about, like,
Not Blue Devils.
for example, no, Blue Devils is a great example, but think about, like, Blue Devils 97, 98, 99. Think about Cavaliers 2000, 2001, 2002. I vividly remember those shows, because everybody had the same uniform. They weren't going crazy, but what they were doing just from a marching and maneuvering standpoint, and then the music that they played, and then what they had their visual ensemble do, really characterized the point that they were trying to get across, and the moves that they were trying to get across in terms of, like, storytelling were very large, and they weren't so, like, tightened down to, like, I'd say, like, if I watched Devs in, like, 2015 or, you know what I mean, like 2000, like, it wasn't so tightened down to where now I'm trying to understand what I'm watching and digest the music at the same time, right?
Yeah.
So it was like, back then, that's why I call it the sweet spot. Like, back then, early 90s to, like, mid 2000s, things were still dialed way back to where I immediately understood what show they were trying to do, and then all I had to do was appreciate the music. To where now it's like, it's almost like going and watching a good movie versus watching a bunch of TV shows on your phone. Like, you just have so much information being thrown at you that you can't appreciate the larger whole of what's to its most simplistic form, which is just music, right? Because you're having to focus on basically a movie production that's going on the field. And it's like, think about this, right? The reason why there's background music in movies and it's at a volume where it's background music is because they want you to focus on the action. Versus maybe when an action dials down in a movie and now they pump the music up to make a point because they want you to focus on the music. I feel like the activity has gotten to a point to where they try to do all of that at the same time. They want you to focus on all of it at the same time. It's in your face constantly. And if you're a music lover, but you also can't turn off what you enjoy as a person, like, I find myself frustrated in trying to take it all in at once. because I can't enjoy the music side trying to visually reconcile what I'm watching, but I also can't enjoy the visual side of it because I'm still fighting to try to hear the music. So we kind of get like all of it.
I would agree with that. I think that there definitely are some inherent benefits to the drum corps activity and the venue that's there, but I don't think that I feel like drum corps has kind of lost its identity a little bit from a design standpoint to, like you said, it's so laser focused. And I feel like that shows the influence of the WGI activity on drum corps. Because even though we can take certain aspects of WGI and the stories that are told and some of the details, it's not going to translate to a football field that way. It's just literally impossible because of the visual aspects, like Ryan noted, some of the sonic things, like Elanders, you just noted, some of the details of, a hand placement or, certain little gestures that you might do in WGI, and a level of complexity to some degree with what you're able to see in WGI. You can't do that in drum corps. And I feel like the past few years have been, like you said, us as an activity trying to figure out how much we can like shove into that one thing. And it's like, there's no way I can catch all of that. And the same thing with judges. Like if you're standing on this one end, like I think if you took any WGI show and you put it in Lucas Oil, that all of those judges are going to read that show completely different because they can't take in all the nuances because of the distance. That's just literally impossible. But I feel like we're kind of trying to do that just because we're trying to catch up to WGI in a sense and kind of try to catch up to what's happening there artistically, when really DCI has the opportunity, like you said before. I know there are a lot of people that, even though they didn't get the way that they marched, they love the DCI activity just because they love the music and they love the way that it sounds. But I feel like nowadays we try to put so many layers into everything, and everything's layered on top of this, on top of this, on top of this, on top of that, that it's just like, it's hard for the average person to take it in because they can't find one thing that they're like, I just like this. I don't understand what they're doing out there, but this sounds cool and I really like it.
So then I think you gotta ask yourself, from a design aspect, are we trying to get too smart for ourselves by doing storytelling shows in an arena where storytelling is difficult, versus not doing, hub-based shows, or like a show where you just take an idea and expound upon that idea and the different variations on that idea, or, a spectacle type show. The biggest one that I think of, and I'm terrible with show names, but the year Bluecoats did the giant ramps, somebody help me out.
I thought about that too, 2016. Right.
Yeah. Where that show was it had lots of props and it had lots visually going on, but it was a good, for lack of a better term, band show. Like it was next level band drum corps show, same with Tilt.
And I will say I thought about them a lot in the last 10 minutes as we were having this conversation, of somebody that I felt like figured out how to navigate such a large scape and still get the story across adequately. Because even like Bluecoats 2010, I don't remember the name of that show, but Metropolis, yeah. Once again, able to navigate the landscape of the arena and understanding what kind of arena they're trying to navigate, as opposed to trying to shrink the arena into a box when it's not possible. right?
Well, I don't think they're trying to tell a story necessarily, as much as we have this one central hub and look at how many ideas we can make off of it, versus, when I think storytelling shows, I'm thinking like point A, and you've got to go through B, C, D, E, F, all, etc., to get to your final destination, versus like those shows, again, take the last 4 or 5 years of the Bluecoats, where it's like they're not necessarily trying to take you from point A to point B. They've just got point A, and then it's like all of these ideas off point A that are like cool things, and then we're just going to hit you with like the emotional climax of it at the end. When you look at the Beatles show, like, of course the end is going to be Hey Jude, like, but they didn't necessarily tell a story, although they did kind of go chronologically through it. And there was that story that John Thrower and Matt Jordan talked about, like it was based off a CD with the counting in the background, like a specific recording. But like, I didn't need to know that to know that, like, okay, that's a Beatles tune, that's a Beatles tune, that's a Beatles tune. They're doing Hey Jude, pull at my heartstrings, that kind of stuff. But it wasn't necessarily a story. And I think you go back to Tilt, the big sound sample where they pitch bend the brass, that kind of stuff, and they visually match with it. It's like highly effective moments, and effective moments hit you, in the feels or wherever it hits you. But again, it's not a plot in the story. It's just this cool thing.
Are we saying that that's bad though? And that's what I would wonder, because I feel like in the drum corps community, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I will say there are a lot of people in the drum corps community that are either very pro, I really like the Bluecoats, and then there's other people that are just like, I absolutely hate the Bluecoats. And I think it's because everybody has their own version of what they feel like is a great drum corps show. And some people are story people, and some people are concept people. And I feel like the most successful group is going to be the one that's able to do a little bit of both. That they're going to give you enough context for you to make up your own story and impose your own story on the music. You know what I'm saying? Rather than some people who tend to get insulted by like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay, I get it. Like the next thing that's going to happen, there's going to be a happy ending, blah, 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 or this person dies at the end. You know what I mean? Like some people don't like that. So I feel like at least, regardless of what anyone's opinion of the Bluecoats are, because I mean, I like them. I think they have their own style. They're not necessarily my favorite drum corps, but I feel like they have a distinct way of doing their shows. I think that everybody has to find a way that works for them. And I feel like maybe it's based on current culture, I feel like A, B, C, D, E, F, G doesn't work anymore. And I think audiences aren't as attracted to that. Depending on age and stuff like that, I don't think they're attracted to it.
It's very hard to keep the attention, especially of the younger crowd, when you're trying to tell a story versus like cool thing, cool thing, cool thing, cool thing, cool thing, cool thing, And I think, you can make that same argument, for every drum corps. Everybody's going to like a certain drum corps, and, everyone's going to hate a certain drum corps. I think it's all about, them trying to stick with an identity that they've picked out, which we've talked about in the past, but also like doing what they believe is right. I mean, I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. Some people are going to appeal to storytelling shows. Some people are going to appeal to effect-based shows. For me personally, I struggle with storytelling shows. Like, I don't know why. I just do. And that's not to say that I don't enjoy storytelling shows. I just struggle to keep attention where it's like, okay, I've read this story before. Cool. I know the story of this. Show me something cool. You know, especially when storytelling shows are more horizontal. So you got to stay in it the whole time to get the point. Versus vertical moments where it's like, if I zone out for 5 seconds or a minute and a half, it doesn't matter
Go to the
because
bathroom.
I'm going to get hit with something every minute and a half, 30 seconds, 40 seconds, whatever the design, you know, of the show allows for. So it is harder because you've got to, with a story show that is horizontally designed, you got to keep their attention for 10 whole minutes or 7 minutes or 4 minutes, whatever the idiom is you're performing in. Whereas with an effects show, if somebody blinks, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And with how fast-paced life is now, where it's like on my phone, I can be on Facebook and then flip to Instagram and then go to TikTok and then go to whatever and then pick my computer up and I can do this. Like, and video game and like kids' TV shows are now rapid fire segments. Like, we're not teaching people to have a long attention span, a horizontal attention span. It's like, entertain me. I'm bored. Like, yeah, like that, you know?
Right.
And I mean, I will admit that I'm guilty of it, as I'm sure we all are. Like, if a show doesn't catch me right off the bat, I'm done.
Oh, talking about shows, I'm going to take a little rabbit trail. I'm watching The Expanse now on the Amazon Prime.
Mm-hmm.
It took 8. I watched the entire season 1, but it took 8 episodes for me to finally be like, okay, I kind of like this. Whereas like The Witcher or a Carbon, Adam
Altered
Carbon or
Carbon.
something. Yeah, Altered
Carbon.
Carbon on Netflix. Yeah. Dude, they got me on the first episode.
And that's exactly the point that I think we're talking about here, or the dichotomy that we're talking about is a content-driven item versus a story-driven item. I almost want to blame Christopher Nolan for it, for giving us such a story-driven Batman saga that it let people in to say, this is something that I really enjoy. But he's very crafty in the films that he does because he gives a whole lot of content in connection with that story, which is what makes a lot of his movies very, very good, right? I think George
and Hans Zimmer is part of it all the time.
Well, and I think I was going to lean back to George Lucas. Like, the reason why the Star Wars movies were so successful is you had a long story, but you had a lot of content that just kind of kept hitting you all the way through. And I think that might be something that as an activity we have to look at. Are we still providing enough content, even if we're trying to tell a story, that we keep the audience engaged for the duration of the show? Because 10 minutes is a long time to ask for my time, right? Like, we talk about, like, Quibi is now the new medium for what they're trying to do with movies and stuff like that. And their model is 10 minutes or less. But you're talking about sizing down hour and a half, 30-minute TV show set down to 10 minutes. So cutting it into thirds now. So if we say the traditional drum corps model is 10 to 12 minutes, you got to make me want to watch the next 4 minutes. Like, if I'm not buying it in 3, I'm not guaranteed they'll be interested for the next 7, right? So, like, the content has to be so segmented, and you got to keep dropping it on me over and over and over again that I don't even recognize I've been sitting there and watching it for 10 minutes. But how often do we watch a drum corps show and we're just like, all right, cool. All right, next, right? And that's even drum corps shows that I've taught. And I can't, like, I'm not gonna lie about that, but it's like, we could have made better decisions when we were designing to say, okay, this becomes disinteresting at this point. What more can we do? You know what I'm saying? And that's why I think when I say, like, the the happy medium years was because music drove it more than story. And you had music content that kept you engaged all the way through the show. Like,
Yes.
they were hitting a power chord like every 45 seconds to a minute, to where it was like, wake up, oh, like you were just amazed by either something visually that the guard was doing, something crazy that the drum line was doing, or something crazy that the horn line was doing, literally like every 30, 45 seconds to a minute, to where like you could watch a show and not even realize you've been sitting there for 12 minutes, right? But it's like now you're watching so hard trying to catch every single detail that you even miss sometimes what they're trying to tell you at that some point. So we're really having a conversation about clarity of intent for all the WGI folks out there, right? Literally, that's what we've been talking about this entire time.
The entire time.
Clarity of intent.
But you know what? I think a lot of it is has come from, again, just trends in general.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, obviously, when a group wins that is very esoteric in their presentation, obviously everybody else kind of follows suit a little bit. And I felt like I feel like there's definitely a distinct difference between the Blue Devils in the past 10 years, from 2010 all the way up until now, from Blue Devils of 2000 through 2009. You know what I mean? And I feel like everyone kind of started to go in that direction. One of the things that I did like about the Blue Coats in 2016 was that was one of the few shows that I can remember that I actually liked all of the music that was played. Like everything that they did, I thought it was really cool and I really liked it all. Now, visually, all the other stuff, it's kind of like, okay, maybe that's your cup of tea, maybe that's not your cup of tea. But at the same time, I feel like musically, all of it was interesting. And I feel like for me, one of the things that I know that I gravitate towards is, like Ryan said, all these cool things are happening. But then when I go back and watch it again, I can see a storyline that's there. That you didn't necessarily tell me the storyline, but I understand the concepts. And I can this is actually a lot deeper and has more nuance and more depth to this show than I initially thought that it did. And I feel like right now what we do, or what I see like really prevalent within the activity, is everybody tries to give us like this really deep story and like all these super deep concepts. But the entertainment factor in a lot of ways is missing, just because it's like you're having a conversation with other artists. And like, that's cool for artists to have a conversation with other artists. But if the general public does not understand your work, you won't sell any paintings. And I feel like for the longest time, the drum corps activity has kind of been the starving artist by choice. Because I personally don't believe that you have to be a starving artist. Like, I feel like, for one, there's always going to be some part of it that nobody's going to get except you, because you're the artist. And even if you probably explained it to them, they're not going to get it. But at the same time, the point of the art is to make people feel something. Is for people to actually react, even if they hate it or love it, whatever. Like, the whole point is to get people to react. So how do we feel, I guess, within the drum corps activity? How do we feel about it not being within the landscape of the majority of the world anymore? You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of, again, it's kind of our own thing that nobody else really gets to enjoy.
I think we've kind of done it to ourselves, because if you're talking about like art, I don't know that, you can necessarily consider any aspect of band, whether it be drum corps or indoor or whatever, art necessarily. And I use art in quotations because, like, think about an actual artist, or think about like a movie producer. Like, we're not producing the same experience that they are. So it is art, but it's not at the level that I think we sometimes want to believe it is. Like, it's just a different segment of art. But I think we're so wrapped up sometimes in the cinematography of the world that we can experience through, again, quote unquote, art, that we're trying to do that when it's not possible. You know, and I think the biggest thing is that when you watch a movie, you know, transitions still hold your attention. And I think the worst thing about drum corps and band and indoor shows is that we don't treat transitions with any importance. Like, it's just a build. We got to hit them, we got to start soft, and we got to build. And then we got to hit them, and we got to start soft, and we got to build. But like, there's other ways to go about it, like tension and release. You know, the release doesn't always have to be like wham, wham. It doesn't have to do that every single time, you know. And I just think that we throw transitions away, and that's why we can't tell stories, or that's why we struggle to tell stories, because we've got the major plot points of a story, but between that, we're just going to march and play. So are we telling a story, or are we just marching and playing? You know? And I hate to say it, but when you go to tell a story, you've actually got to tell the story. I'm probably going to get myself in trouble with this. If you're telling a story, clean beats don't tell a story.
You're right.
You've got to have somebody on staff that's like all about the story and making sure that the story is the foremost thing in the show. And then the rest of the staff has to understand that when it's time to clean, it's time to clean. And when it's time to tell the story, if they're not clean, you didn't use your time well.
It's a good point. I think we got a lot to chew on and a lot to think about here as paragons of the activity. Sorry, I just watched the crossover for the DC Arrowverse, and they were talking about paragons. I wanted to use it in the sentence. I think we talked about a lot tonight about like some ifs, ands, buts about the activity and some honest truths. Like some honest truths about just even our experience in it, and breaking down some of those walls, maybe changing the conversation a little bit on what we can do to to kind of move it forward in a sense. Move it forward by moving it back a little bit.
Back to the future.
Yeah, back to the future. Yeah, a little bit. You know, what's on your mind, John?
Oh no, that was just going backward.
I think for us it always comes from a place of we love it so much that we don't want to see it subside or fail or anything like that, and we're willing to open up some of our landscape and what we think about to try to find some solutions. You know, like I think all the conversations, especially all the webinars and stuff that I've been seeing over the summer, is everybody's trying to do that. Everybody's trying to figure out what is it going to take to keep this around, because it's hard to invest in something that emotional for the last half of your life and then it all get ripped away because of a virus or, you know, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, you want to see what else can be done to savor and maintain some semblance of something that's had such a large impact on so many people, right? And then how many more people can get that same impact by us molding that model to something different, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we have to allow drum corps to mean something to people, again, that have not been within the activity. You know, we have to be bigger than our little bubble. And I feel like that's what we've done for a long time. We've just been in our own little bubble. So if drum corps goes away, oh, this little small segment of people in the world are like sad. But when that drum corps is connected to other bands, and that drum corps has been a driving force in the bands in their state, marching bands in their state being so much better, and the groups in their area being so much better, then there's an entire community of people that are fighting for an activity, even though they've never been a part of the activity. They've seen the direct benefits of the activity on their students who never marched, and maybe they were just in a high school band. So I think that we have to take a step back and realize at the end of the day, even though we start to create for ourselves out of our own pure enjoyment, again, music is still about communication. And if your message doesn't hit anybody else, then what, I mean, was it really music? Was it actually effective? You know what I mean? And I feel like that's the biggest thing that keeps coming back to my mind is how can we interweave the drum corps activity into every area of music education that it's around? You know, because again, then it becomes important to more people than just the people that teach it or the people that participate.
Yeah, I think the closest example of that, I don't know if you guys have seen it, is what Boston does with their concert in the parks program. So they do a concert in the parks, but they have a bunch of youth organizations kind of under their umbrella. So they have like like a youth drumming thing and a couple of other like small like youth oriented programs going on. I don't know a ton about it, but I know that they bring a bunch of community involvement in because it's for youth programs, specifically to have kids do stuff after school and during the summer, so they're not sitting at home playing PlayStation and eating Cheetos all day. But it gets them out and involved. But they do it also right in downtown Boston in a park. I don't know what the park is in downtown Boston that's surrounded by like high-rise businesses. So that way, when they're putting this concert on, they're drawing the attention of the business, and they're making community involvement. And from what I know, is this thing is pretty packed every year. But it's the community involvement while still facilitating the financial need, and that's why, if you remember, a handful of years ago, when it was like, man, Boston came into a bunch of money, that was when this concert in the park thing really started taking off. So I think there's also a correlation between like how much you can get your community invested, or how much you invest in your community and how much your community will invest in you. And, I think that's the biggest thing going forward, because if drum corps is going to survive, it's got to be a give and take on both ends. It's got to be them giving back to the community more and communicating better, and the community getting involved because they care.
I agree. I agree.
I'm interested to know, how do you guys think drum corps could do that practically? Like, how can I noticed the thing that you just said, Ryan, with Boston. How do you guys think drum corps can positively become more interwoven into the fabric of the community that they're around?
I think the quickest way is to hold more clinics, maybe that don't necessarily have like a high price cost, or any cost at all. If you can get enough volunteer members to be able to do it, and enough staff to be able to do it, to where you just say, hey, send this out to all the schools. And I always say lean to your elementary schools, because that's really who we need to be talking to, right? We need to be talking to the kids that are soon going to be making a decision whether or not they want to be a musician, if they haven't already made that decision, right? Because that's where we're losing kids to, I say losing like I'm taking it personally. Oh, we lost another one. Like that. But like, that's where kids are making up their minds what they want to spend their time doing. And if we're in the function of how music education is important, because I know middle school is a time to where students can do a lot of different things and they're not so forced to silo down into something specific like high school. But if we can start reaching out in communities at that elementary age, then we can really start convincing them that music needs to have a lasting importance on your life, whether you're singing, whether you're dancing, whether you're drumming, whether you're playing. Doesn't matter what you're doing, as long as you understand the importance of music and how it can benefit your lifespan for the rest of your life, whether you become a musician or you don't, right?
I'll tag on to that. Like, March is Music in Our Schools Month. Like, schools would love. I mean, I did a thing for an elementary school where it was like 3 of us from college just went out and we took some like buckets and some small percussion instruments and we made some shakers and whatnot, and we just jammed. Like, we came up with a little groove and then we built upon it and we soloed. And we got kids up and we got them dancing and we got them shaking, egg shakers with us and doing like a conga line at one point, and like just making music fun, but also, again, getting out. Like, how many schools wouldn't love a professional musical organization to go out and do that? And you see the NFL does it all the time with their like Play 60 and the camps that they hold. And they're a professional sports. Don't we call ourselves the professional marching arts? And getting involved that way. And I think it's super easy, like, to get somebody to go out to a school, and again, like, time is money, and I'm not the first person that'll like do pro bono work, but for the right cause, and music is the right cause in our lives, like, to see this continue on, like, yeah, I would go play for an hour for elementary school kids, to draw attention to an organization, or to the high school band, or to the indoor drum line or whatever. But I think Elanders said, you were right on the money with like the clinic thing. Like, when did drum corps start doing online clinics for anybody that wanted to show up? Before COVID, they didn't. Well, they might have done a virtual camp or so, but now they're doing clinics, and yeah, there's a fee involved. Like, yeah, there's a little bit of the like, it's work. We love what we do and it's art, but it's work at the end of the day, But yeah, I think we can hopefully every aspect of the pageantry arts will look at how to get more involved. I think, just because I've been involved, I think DCA is ahead of DCI in it, just because they have to draw from community support because they're a weekend only activity. But I mean, you still see the struggle there, where it's like, it's a weekend only activity. Let's do something a little bit during the week. Let's put a small group together and go, play outside Walmart and donate, the donations go to the kids' tour fees, that kind of stuff, like super small things. I think the off season doesn't get used enough, outside of like, let's design our show and put our instructional staff together and do all this and that and the other thing, just thinking about for like us, how can we use the off season better? I think there's a lot to ponder in this time.
Amen. I think that's a good point to sign off on. Definitely a lot to ponder in this time. We brought up a lot of good stuff today. So if you're out there in the web space and you do want to give us some more content ideas or even just chat with us about some of the stuff that we've talked about, hit us up, voltapercussion@gmail.com. And we'll catch you guys on the next one. Deuces.